Hello, David Barron here, also known as Dantalian Jones. I want to do this video to just sort of talk about my personal experience doing jury duty and during the process of jury selection. And I want to sort of point out a couple things I did that I think led to me not being selected to be on the jury. First of all, being on a jury is a civic duty. I'm not going to shirk it. And if I get selected to be on a jury, I am going to be the very best juror that I can be. But I also took this as an opportunity to do a little social experiment. So what happened, I was called in, and they had to choose a 12-person jury. And from the pool, they picked about 24 people. And I was one of them. And they sat me, I was there in the very front row, which I thought was sort of an advantage for me. And I decided, as a social experiment, what could I do that is just slightly out of the norm, but would probably lead to me not being selected as a juror? I did three things. First of all, I started with the mindset of, this is a social experiment. I'm going to be the best juror I can if I'm selected, but I'm also going to see what I can do right now to not be selected as a juror. So the first thing I did was I made a decision that I was going to make unblinking eye contact with one of the attorneys. Now, the one that was closest in best line of sight to me at that time was the defense attorney. So I just continued to have this unblinking eye contact with him. And of course, there were other people he was talking to and things like that, but whenever he looked toward me, he was seeing me looking straight at him, and I did not look away. And I decided that because, first of all, he was the one in line of sight, and this was a criminal trial. The fellow had done some stupid things, essentially. And I didn't want to make him any more uncomfortable than he was, so the defendant. So I picked the defense attorney and locked eye contact with him. Understand what you're seeing. I'm in the very front row. I'm actually in the center of the front row, wearing all black, the only person wearing completely black. No, I'm not wearing my hat. So I'm wearing all black, and I'm sitting absolutely motionless, straight up in my chair, with my eyes locked on that one attorney. Now, during this process, what I'm assuming is what any attorney is going to want from a juror is at least a juror that they can read, that they can feel they can rely on their responses. And I figured that if I was different in that context, I was unmoving, I was absolutely stoic, and I kept looking straight at this attorney, it would make me sort of stand out as being unreadable. During this, there's a series of questions that they ask, including what your occupation is. I told them very sort of monotone, I am a hypnotist. I have also published on influence and persuasion. And then I followed up with the other questions that they asked. I don't know if that had any impact on them or not. I was obviously the only hypnotist there. And then during the set of questionings, another thing that I did is they mentioned the name of the defendant. They talked about what he's being charged with. And when I was asked questions, I would use the name of the defendant, Mr. Gallagher, or whatever his name was at the time. That's not his real name. I'd say Mr. Gallagher, and so on. First up was the defense attorney. I have to give him some credit. He did a good, not a perfect or a great job, but he did a very good job of emphasizing doubt and making you begin to question things, because it has to be beyond a reasonable doubt that you're going to convict him. So he did a very good emphasis on creating a sense, a weight of doubt beforehand, just through his line of questionings. And then the prosecution came up, and they were right in front of me. During this, I was looking at the prosecution, but occasionally I would, without blinking, I would turn my attention this way and look toward the defense attorney. And I don't know if he saw me, but if he did, it was rather probably unnerving, maybe. And there were questions that were asked by the prosecution, and one of the questions was, is the defense, or is the person, let's call him Mr. Gallagher, is Mr. Gallagher guilty? And I just relied on my high school civics class. I said, no, he's innocent, and you know, it's up to the prosecution to prove guilt. And then he asked other people, and they said, I don't know if he's guilty. But I think that was probably also something that emphasized, that made it unlikely for them to want me. But so at the end, after the voir dire, the jury selection, they selected the jury. I was just waiting for my number to be called, and it wasn't called, so I was not selected. And I did something also atypical, is as I was leaving the courtroom, again, I was not a juror, I was not involved in the system anymore, I wished the defendant good luck. No one else, of course, made eye contact with the guy. So here's what I would do if you want to test this out, and it may be a little uncomfortable for you, but I encourage you to do it. A couple of things. First of all, you could wear all black. That's one thing. It will certainly make you stand out. The other is decide to lock eyes with one of the attorneys and look at them, unmoving, unflinching. If they move, your head moves. You know, you don't move your eyes, you move your head. Sort of like one of those freaky Gothic portraits. Let's recap. Recognize that you have to be unreadable. So I was totally stoic, no emotional expression. I locked eyes with one of the attorneys. I used the defendant's name when asked questions, used it in the very same context that the attorneys used the defendant's name, and take an attitude of, you know, I'm going to be a good juror if I'm selected. And that way no one loses. If you get selected, hey, it was a great experiment. Now my experiment, this experiment is not over, because I have the rest of the month and I may be selected again to be on jury duty. We'll see what happens. I'll keep you posted. I would very much like to hear your responses about this little social experiment, and be aware that if you are going to lock eyes with somebody like that, you're not staring maliciously at them, you're just looking at them. And it can be a little uncomfortable if you're not used to doing that. But I'd love to hear your responses, and so that's my experience. Take care. Bye.